For 1,000 years, the story of Europe reaching America began and ended with one name: Columbus, 1492, a date every schoolchild learns by heart. But buried in the frozen soil of Greenland, beneath centuries of snow and silence, lay the evidence of a different story entirely. Not a story of discovery, but of persistence. Not one voyage, but hundreds of crossings. In the year 2023, a researcher in Iceland sorted through more than 8,000 fragments of old wood and found a handful that simply should not exist. Wood whose very species betrayed where it came from, a signature as precise as a fingerprint. And it pointed across the ocean. So here's the question. Did the Vikings ever really leave America, or did they keep coming back for so long that history forgot to count the years? And the answer was in the wood. To understand why this discovery unsettles so much, you first have to understand what the experts were already willing to accept. And for 60 years, the line they drew was a firm one. The Vikings reached North America. That much was settled. A windswept site on the northern tip of Newfoundland, a place called Meadows, gave up the proof in the 1960s. Sod longhouses, iron nails, a bronze cloak pin, a workshop for smelting iron. Unmistakably Norse and unmistakably real. But the consensus filed that triumph under a single quiet word. Experiment. A handful of years, a small band of settlers, a foothold that failed. The Vikings came, the story went, looked around, could not handle the people who already lived there, and sailed home for good. Footnote. A near miss. The continent waiting another 5 centuries for Columbus. Then a researcher in Iceland looked at the wood. Her name is Lísabet Guðmundsdóttir of the University of Iceland, and in the year 2023, she published a study in the journal Antiquity that began with a question so simple it sounds almost dull. In a land with almost no trees, where did the Greenland Norse get their wood? To answer it, she did something painstaking. She examined 8,552 fragments of wood, pulled over decades from 5 Norse sites in Greenland, settlements occupied across 4 full centuries, from around the year 1000 to the years after 1300. Now here the honesty matters because the method is not what the headlines suggest. She did not sequence genetic code. What she did was in some ways more elegant. She placed the wood under a microscope and read its cellular structure, the architecture of the grain itself, which differs from one species of tree to the next as reliably as a fingerprint differs from one human hand to the next. Each kind of wood carries a signature, and a signature, read carefully, tells you where a tree grew. Most of what she found was exactly what you would expect. Local scrub, driftwood, ordinary European timber, thousands of fragments telling an unremarkable story. But scattered among them were a small number of pieces, fewer than 2 dozen, that did not fit at all. And 2 species in that handful stopped the work cold. Hemlock and jack pine. Let those 2 names settle, because everything turns on them. Neither tree grew anywhere in Europe during the medieval centuries. Neither could have drifted across the open ocean and washed ashore, weathered into anonymity. But both grew in abundance along one very specific stretch of coastline on the far side of the Atlantic, the Gulf of St. Lawrence and the forested shores of Atlantic Canada, the exact region the Old Norse sagas had named 800 years earlier. Markland, the land of forests. The wood had a home address, and it was not Greenland. But here is what lifts this from curious to extraordinary. These foreign fragments did not come from one moment in time. They did not cluster around a single desperate voyage that a frightened crew might have made once and never again. They were spread across the entire arc of the Norse presence in Greenland, some from the early years of settlement, some from the later centuries, the long twilight before the colony vanished, which means this was not an accident. It was not a legend. It was a pattern that held for generation after generation after generation. The Vikings were not making one famous trip to a mysterious land and then retreating into myth. They were running a supply route, a working connection to the coast of North America that stayed open, by the evidence in the wood, for the better part of 300 years. And that single fact quietly dismantles the comfortable old story. Because you do not maintain a transatlantic timber run for 3 centuries by mistake. You do it because you need something, and you know exactly where to find it, and you are willing to cross some of the deadliest water on Earth to bring it home. So the question is no longer whether the Norse reached America. It is why they kept going back. Why a desperate people clinging to survival would point their ships again and again at a coastline Europe would not see for another 500 years. And to understand that, you have to understand just how badly Greenland had trapped them. The trap began, as these things often do, with a man running from something. In the year 985, Eric the Red was exiled from Iceland for manslaughter. He had killed men in a feud, and the law gave him 3 years to be gone. Most exiles would have crept back to Norway. Eric did the opposite. He turned his ship west, toward a frozen land glimpsed years earlier by sailors blown off course, and he spent his banishment exploring its fjords. And when his sentence ended, he did not return quietly. He came back to Iceland selling a dream. He called the new land Greenland, and that name was a lie, or at least a clever piece of salesmanship. Eric knew precisely what he was doing. Green was a promise. It conjured pasture, warmth, abundance. It sold land to people who had none. Independence to people crowded onto an island already full. And it worked. A fleet of 25 ships set out behind him, loaded with families, livestock, tools, everything needed to build a world from nothing. Only 14 of those ships survived the crossing. The rest were swallowed by the North Atlantic before they ever saw the coast. But the 14 came through, and the people aboard them did something remarkable. They took a thin green rim of habitable land at the edge of the ice, and they recreated, stone by stone and beam by beam, the farming society they had left behind. They raised cattle and sheep. They built halls and churches. They carried medieval Europe across the ocean and set it down on the shore. But the land gave them a cruel and specific gift. It offered grass and game and stone and turf, enough to live on if you were tough and lucky. And it withheld the one material their entire civilization was built around: wood. Greenland's forests, such as they were, amounted to dwarf birch and stunted willow. Shrubs, really, gnarled and low, barely fit for kindling and utterly useless for anything that had to bear weight or cross water. And that was a catastrophe, because Norse life did not merely use wood. It depended on wood the way we depend on electricity. Pull it out, and everything stops. Consider just one thing they could not do without: a ship. A single Viking longship swallowed 20 to 30 cubic meters of timber, and that timber came from dozens of separate trees, each chosen for a purpose. The keel alone, the long spine that held the whole vessel together, demanded one straight oak trunk more than 10 meters long. There was no substitute. No shrub on Greenland could provide it, and without ships, the colony was not a colony at all. It was a prison. No ships meant no crossing to Norway, no trade, no iron for tools and weapons, no grain to supplement the meat and milk, and no escape, none at all, if the winters turned and the land stopped giving. But ships were only the beginning. Every house needed timber to frame its roof and walls. Every barn that sheltered the cattle through the killing cold needed beams. Every tool, every barrel, every loom and cart and door turned on a supply of wood. These people had built an entire way of living around a resource their new home simply did not contain. Think about what that meant. They had crossed an ocean to plant European civilization in a landscape that lacked the single most basic building block of that civilization. It was as if they had carried fire to a world with no fuel. Every roof they raised, every ship they hoped to repair, every winter they intended to survive depended on finding wood somewhere beyond their own shores. And there was only one direction that offered any hope of abundance. Not east, back toward the crowded fjords of Norway, where timber was costly and the voyage long. West, across the strait, toward the wild coastlines the sagas spoke of, toward forests so thick and dark that the Norse had given that land a name built around the word itself. Markland, the land of forests. So the question that decided whether these people lived or died was brutally simple. Where would the wood come from? And for a very long time, historians thought they already knew the answer. They thought the sea itself delivered it. And they were half right, which is often the most misleading thing a person can be. For centuries, the answer historians offered was the sea. And it was not a foolish answer. It was, in fact, partly true. The North Atlantic is a great conveyor belt of timber. Far away in Siberia, immense rivers run north through endless forests, tearing loose trees as they go and carrying them down to the Arctic Ocean. From there, the currents take over, drawing the wood in slow circling drifts across the top of the world, until, season after season, some of it fetches up on the beaches of Greenland. Driftwood, free timber delivered by the ocean to a land that had almost none of its own. The Norse gathered it, prized it, and built with it. And when Lísabet Guðmundsdóttir read the grain of those 8,000 fragments, she confirmed exactly that. Roughly half the wood the Greenland Norse used was driftwood, and most of it was larch and spruce, the unmistakable species of the great Siberian forests. So the old story held up to a point. For a working farm scraping through the year, driftwood and a little local scrub could cover most of what a family needed. The honest version of this historical history has to say so plainly, the sea really did provide. But driftwood carries a flaw written into its very nature, and the fatal flaw is fatal for the one thing that mattered most. Wood that has spent months, sometimes years, tumbling through salt water comes ashore weathered and weakened. The sea soaks into it, splits it, rots its strength from the inside. It will do for a wall or a fire. It will not do for a keel. And it certainly will not do for the precise, load-bearing, life-or-death work of building a vessel meant to cross an ocean. For masts and keels and the careful joinery that keeps a ship from coming apart in a storm, you need fresh timber, strong wood, wood you can choose, and fell, and cut to an exact measure while it still lives. Driftwood cannot be selected. You take what the tide gives you. And this is where the microscope revealed something the tide could never explain. When Guðmundsdóttir looked closely at the foreign fragments, the hemlock and the jack pine, she did not find the worn and rounded surfaces of wood that had drifted for years. She found clean cut marks, the signatures of metal tools, axes and blades, biting into the grain, and the structure of the wood itself told her it had been taken from the base of a living tree, fresh and deliberate, chosen for its quality. This was not salvage, this was harvest. But the truly decisive detail is not the cut marks, it is geography, and it is brutally simple. The Siberian driftwood reaches Greenland because a current carries it there. There is a road across the water, and the wood travels it. Hemlock and jack pine grow along the Atlantic coast of North America, and between that coast and Greenland there is no such road. No ocean current connects eastern North America to Greenland. None. The water does not flow that way. So those species could not have drifted across. They could not have arrived by accident. The sea which delivered the larch and the spruce free of charge, would never deliver a single splinter of American hemlock to a Greenland beach. Not in 1,000 years. Not in 10,000. Which leaves only one explanation, and it is staggering in its plainness. For that wood to reach Greenland, human hands had to cut it. Human hands had to haul it down to the shore and load it aboard a ship. And human will, stubborn and repeated and unafraid, had to drive that ship across 400 miles of the Davis Strait, some of the coldest and most violent water on the face of the earth. There is no current to think. There is only effort, crossing after crossing, deliberate and dangerous, century upon century. The wood did not drift home. Someone went and got it. And once you accept that, a new question opens beneath the old